She found out she was pregnant the same night she signed the divorce papers. Standing in the rain outside Brooklyn General, a plastic test strip in her shaking hand, Amina Okoro did not cry. She had no tears left. She had spent 3 years married to a man who looked through her like glass, a man whose name made other men flinch, whose silence could fill a room like smoke. Now she was free of him, and she was carrying his child. If you've ever loved someone who didn't know how to love you back, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday night, the kind that doesn't politely announce itself but simply arrives, cold, indifferent, personal. Amina Okoro stood beneath the narrow overhang of Brooklyn General's east entrance and stared at the two thin lines on the test strip until her vision blurred. Around her, hospital staff moved in and out through the automatic doors, umbrellas snapping open, shoes squeaking on the wet concrete. Nobody looked at her. Nobody saw the woman in the good wool coat standing completely still while the world dissolved around her. She had taken the test on impulse, a box she'd grabbed from the pharmacy on Atlantic Avenue 3 days ago and shoved into her bag the way you shove things you're not ready to think about. She'd been nauseous for 2 weeks and written it off as stress. The divorce, the apartment, the particular exhaustion of dismantling a marriage that had been hollow for so long that even its ending felt like a formality. 48 hours ago, she had signed her name across from Jun Seok Kang's in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a midtown law firm. He had worn charcoal gray. He had not looked at her. His attorney, a thin man named Mr. Choi, who moved with the practiced quiet of someone accustomed to rooms full of dangerous people, had slid the documents across the table with the efficiency of a man who understood that speed was mercy. Jun Seok had signed without hesitation, without flinching, without once glancing at the woman he was releasing like she was a contractual obligation he was finally free of. Amina had told herself she didn't care. She had repeated it on the elevator ride down, on the cab ride back to Brooklyn, in the mirror of her new bathroom in her new apartment with its second-hand furniture and its view of a parking garage. She had told herself she was relieved. The test strip said otherwise. She shoved it into her coat pocket and walked out into the rain without opening her umbrella. The apartment was a one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building on Dean Street, caught between gentrification and memory, where the hallway always smelled faintly of something being fried, and someone's television bled through the walls every evening at 7. Amina had chosen it deliberately. Nothing about it reminded her of the penthouse on Park Avenue where she had spent 3 years watching Jun Seok disappear into himself. No marble, no silence that felt like punishment, no art on the walls that cost more than her parents had earned in a decade and had been selected by someone she'd never met. She climbed the 4 flights with her wet coat dripping on the stairs and sat down on the edge of her bed without turning on the light. She was 34 years old. She had an MBA from Wharton and a consulting practice that was finally gaining traction after she'd walked away from the corporate world to build something of her own. She was intelligent and stubborn and had a laugh that made rooms turn. She was also, she now understood, 11 or 12 weeks pregnant, alone in a dim apartment in Brooklyn, with the child of a man who had looked through her for 3 years and signed her away without blinking. She pressed one hand flat against her abdomen, not tenderly, just to feel something solid. "Okay," she said to the dark. "Okay." It wasn't strength. It was the particular sound a person makes when they've run out of options and have to invent a new one on the spot. Jun Seok Kang did not learn about the pregnancy from Amina. He learned about it from a man named Dr. Park. It happened 11 days after the divorce, at a charity dinner in the private dining room of a hotel in Koreatown that Jun Seok attended the way he attended most social obligations, completely present on the surface, completely somewhere else underneath. He had shaken hands, accepted glasses of wine he didn't drink, permitted photographs with men who considered him a legitimate businessman because the alternative was too inconvenient to consider. His network of import companies, real estate holdings, and private investment vehicles had been constructed over 15 years with the specific intention of appearing unremarkable. Dr. Park was the physician who ran the obstetrics practice on Fulton Street that Jun Seok had paid for, quietly, back when they were still married, Back when Amina had first mentioned wanting a family, and he had said nothing but had arranged things anyway because that was how he loved. Silently, structurally, in ways she was never meant to see. He was 3 glasses of wine into the evening when he caught Jun Seok's eye across the room and came over with the particular warmth of a man who believes he is about to deliver good news. "Your wife," Dr. Park began, and Jun Seok's expression didn't change because it never changed, came in last week. First prenatal. She looked well. Nervous, but well. The silence that followed lasted approximately 2 seconds. To anyone watching, Jun Seok Kang simply nodded and moved the conversation forward. He was excellent at moving things forward. He had been doing it his entire life. Inside, something cracked along a fault line he had spent years pretending wasn't there. He excused himself at 9:15. His driver, a man named Sue, had the car waiting. Jun Seok got in, closed the door, and said nothing for 11 minutes as they moved through midtown traffic. Sue had worked for him for 6 years and understood that silence was not an invitation to fill. "Dean Street," Jun Seok finally said. Sue didn't ask how he knew the address. You didn't ask Jun Seok Kang how he knew things. He didn't go in. He had the car parked half a block down, beneath a broken streetlight, and he sat there for 40 minutes watching the building's front entrance with the same focus he brought to business. Controlled, analytical, building a picture from available data. A light was on in a 4th-floor window. The curtains were closed, but not all the way. He could see the edge of a lamp and the shadow of someone moving across the room. He told himself he was assessing a situation. That was the word he used, internally, because the other words were not words he allowed himself. He had let her go because letting her go was the only thing he knew how to do that felt like protection. The violence that circled his world, the debts and threats and alliances built on mutual destruction, was not something he could dismantle quickly enough for a marriage, for a life. He had loved her by removing himself from her path. He had decided this alone, without asking her, because asking her would have required him to admit how badly he needed her to stay. He understood now, sitting in a car in the rain, watching the window of a woman who was pregnant with his child and had not told him. A man who had made every possible wrong decision for every reason that felt, at the time, like sacrifice. He told Sue to drive. He didn't go back to the penthouse. He went to the building on the west side that housed his operational offices, took the private elevator to the top floor, and stood at the window overlooking the Hudson until 2 in the morning. Then he started making calls. Amina's prenatal appointments were at 10 on Thursday mornings. She took the subway. She brought a book and a small bottle of sparkling water and sat in the waiting room with the same deliberate calm she brought to everything. Not because she felt calm, but because she had learned early that composure was a form of armor, and she was not yet ready to walk through the world without it. The other women in the waiting room had partners with them, or mothers, or older sisters who asked too many questions and meant everything by it. Amina sat alone and read and did not acknowledge the particular weight of that aloneness, because acknowledging it would have required energy she was saving for everything else. She did not know that a car with tinted windows was parked across the street from the Fulton Street Clinic every Thursday morning. She did not know that one of Jun Seok's people had quietly confirmed her address, her schedule, her grocery store, the diner on Flatbush where she sometimes ate breakfast alone on Saturdays with a yellow legal pad and a pen, writing the kind of list that help a person believe they are still in control of their life. She did not know any of this because Jun Seok was thorough in the way that dangerous men are thorough, completely, invisibly, with no trace of himself in the evidence. What she did know was that one morning, 3 weeks after the divorce, she opened her apartment door to find a delivery from the pharmacy on Atlantic Avenue. A bag containing the exact prenatal vitamin brand her OB had recommended, the specific dosage, 3-month supply. No note, no name on the receipt. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, holding the bag. Then she went back inside and called the pharmacy and was told the order had been placed and paid for in cash by a man the cashier described as quiet, Korean, very well dressed. Amina set the bag down on the kitchen counter. She did not open it. She stood with her hands flat on the counter and breathed through her nose and felt something move through her. Not gratitude, not warmth, but a specific fury that was almost worse than grief. because grief meant something was over, and this felt like the opposite of over. She did not call him. She put the vitamins in the cabinet and took one each morning and told herself this changed nothing. 3 days later, her phone rang. She was at her kitchen table with a client proposal half finished on her laptop. The number was one she had deleted but still recognized the way the body recognizes things the mind tries to release. She let it ring 4 times. 5. Then she picked up because not picking up would have felt like fear, and she was not going to be afraid of a phone call. "I know you don't want to talk to me," Jun-seok said. His voice was exactly the same. That was the worst part. Low, precise, with the faint trace of his mother's soul in the consonants. "Then why are you calling?" Amina said. Not a question. A pause. "I wanted to know how you're feeling." "I'm fine." Amina. "I said I'm fine, Jun-seok. We're divorced. You don't get to call and ask how I'm feeling." Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear the quality of the silence the way she had learned to hear it over 3 years. The texture of what he wasn't saying filling up the space between them. "I know about the appointment," he said finally. The room went very still. She didn't ask how. She had learned not to ask how with him. "That's not your business," she said. "It is." "No." Her voice didn't break. She had decided years ago that it would not break in front of this man. "No. You made your choices. You signed the papers the same as I did. Whatever happens in my life from here is mine." "You're carrying my child." "I'm carrying my child." She pressed her palm flat against the table. "I haven't decided what that means for you yet. Maybe it means nothing." "Amina, don't." She cut him off clean. "Don't do the voice. Don't do the thing where you sound patient and reasonable and like the adult in the room. I'm hanging up now." "Someone is watching you," he said quickly, low and flat and without inflection. The voice he used when he was not performing composure but actually feeling it. The cold center of the man. "Someone who is not me and does not wish you well. I need you to hear that." Silence on her end. "I'm not saying it to frighten you. I'm saying it because it's true, and because whatever you decide about me and about the rest, you have to know." The proposal on her laptop was still open. The cursor was blinking. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Dean Street, and someone in the apartment above hers dropped something heavy on the floor. "Who?" she said. "A man named Ryu Seong Hwan. He runs the organization that has been positioned against mine for the last 4 years. He found out about you, about the pregnancy." Her jaw tightened. "How?" "Surveillance. He's very good at it." A beat. "Almost as good as I am. So this is your fault." No hesitation. "Yes." That honesty landed differently than she expected. She had braced for deflection, for the careful language of a man who managed information the way other men managed money. She had not expected the flat, unadorned yes. "What does he want?" she said. "To use you. Against me. The specific method hasn't been determined yet, but the intent is clear." His voice was still even, but she had learned over years to read the underneath of it, and underneath there was something she had almost never heard from him before, something close to fear. "I would like to meet with you, in person. Tomorrow, if you're willing. Somewhere you choose, somewhere you're comfortable. I'll come alone." Amina looked at the prenatal vitamins on the counter. The window above the sink was dark and the rain had started again, tapping at the glass with patient, insistent fingers. "The diner on Flatbush," she said finally. 8 in the morning. I'll be there." "Jun-seok." She stopped, chose the words carefully. "This is not me coming back to you. This is me getting information I need to make a decision about my child's safety. That's it." "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes," he said. And then, quieter, "I'll see you at 8. She hung up. She sat for a long time in the kitchen with her hand still on the phone, looking at nothing. Then she closed the laptop, put her palm against her abdomen the way she had started doing without deciding to, and breathed. Across the city, in an office building 3 miles from where she sat, a man named Ryu Seong Hwan was reviewing a photograph. It had been taken 4 days ago, on a Thursday morning, outside a prenatal clinic on Fulton Street. A woman in a wool coat, walking out into the cold, one hand resting without thinking against her stomach. Xiang Huan studied it for a moment. Then he set it down and reached for his phone. "We moved to the next phase," he said, when the line connected. Whatever was coming wasn't coming slowly. And Amina Okoro, sitting alone in her Brooklyn apartment with a half-finished proposal and a baby she hadn't planned and a threat she hadn't chosen, didn't yet know that the man in that photograph already knew her name, her schedule, her grocery store, and the diner on Flatbush where she sometimes ate breakfast on Saturdays. She didn't know that tomorrow morning's meeting at 8 o'clock would be the last ordinary moment either of them had for a very long time. The diner on Flatbush was called Maze, and it had been there since 1987, which meant it had outlasted 3 recessions, 2 ownership changes, and the particular kind of neighborhood transformation that replaced laundromats with juice bars and called it progress. The booths were red vinyl patched with electrical tape. The coffee came in ceramic mugs that had been washed 10,000 times and were better for it. Amina arrived at 7:52 and took the booth in the back corner, the one with sightlines to both the entrance and the kitchen hallway, a habit she had developed without noticing during 3 years of being married to a man who always sat with his back to the wall. She ordered coffee and water and did not open her phone. She sat with her hands around the mug and watched the door. Jun Seok arrived at 7:59. He came alone, as he'd said. No Sue, no the 2 men who usually flanked him at anything that resembled a public appearance. He wore a dark jacket over a gray sweater, no tie, which for him was the equivalent of arriving in pajamas. He looked, she thought, like he had not slept. There were shadows beneath his eyes that his usual composure couldn't entirely cover, and he moved through the diner with the contained precision of a man holding himself together through will alone. He slid into the booth across from her. The waitress came. He ordered coffee, black, and when the waitress left, there was a silence between them that had weight and temperature and history. "You look tired," Amina said. "I am," he said, which surprised her, because the old Jun Seok would have said he was fine. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Tell me about Xiang Huan." He did. He was precise about it, the way he was precise about everything. Laying out the facts in order, without dramatization, because the facts themselves were dramatic enough. Ryu Xiang Huan had been building his organization for 11 years, primarily through narcotics distribution in the Northeast Corridor and contract enforcement for 3 separate financial networks that operated in the gray space between legitimate investment and organized extortion. For 4 years, he had been circling Jun Seok's territory, not attacking directly but applying pressure. Poaching lieutenants, disrupting supply chains, filing anonymous regulatory complaints against the legitimate businesses that served as the public face of Jun Seok's empire. "He is patient," Jun Seok said. "It's his greatest strength. He waits until he finds the thing that costs most and then he takes it." "And that thing is me now," Amina said. "Yes." She set down her mug. "Because of your child. Because having leverage over your child's mother is leverage over you." "Yes." "And if you had never sent those vitamins, if you had stayed away." She paused. "Would he have found me anyway?" Jun Seok's jaw tightened slightly. A small movement. She had learned to read small movements. "His surveillance was already on me when you were still my wife. He knew about you for a long time. The pregnancy accelerated his timeline, but..." He stopped. "He would have found you regardless. I want to be honest about that. But your watching me made it easier for him to confirm I mattered." A long pause. "Yes, that is also true." She looked at him across the table. In the 3 years of their marriage, she had spent so much time trying to read this face, trying to find the seam where the controlled exterior ended and the actual man began, and had mostly failed. Now sitting in a patched vinyl booth in a diner on Flatbush, with the smell of bacon grease and old coffee in the air, she could see something in him she had not seen before. Not softness, something rawer than that. The look of a man who has finally run out of the room he built to hide in. "What are you asking me to do?" she said. "Let me move you somewhere safe. A property I own upstate about 90 minutes out. Staffed, secured, completely off any documented record attached to my name. Xiang Huan's people are good, but they work from data. If there's no data trail, they work blind." "For how long?" "Until I handle this." "Handle," she repeated. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer immediately. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. It means resolving the threat in a way that makes it permanent. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that means, she said. I was married to you for 3 years. I'm not naive and I'm not fragile, so don't speak to me like I am. I know you're not. Then say it plainly. He looked at her directly. I'm going to dismantle his ability to threaten anyone connected to me. That will require things I'm not going to describe in detail and that you would probably prefer not to have described. And while you're doing that, I'm supposed to sit in a house in the country and wait. Yes. The word landed flat between them. Amina picked up her mug, realized it was empty, and set it down. The waitress materialized and refilled it without being asked, the way good diner waitresses do, reading the table with the peripheral vision of long experience and the instinct to stay out of whatever was clearly a difficult conversation. I have clients, Amina said when the waitress had gone. I have a practice I'm building. I have a life I'm in the process of constructing from scratch. Because the last one, she stopped, recalibrated. Because I needed to start over. I can't just disappear into a safe house because you made enemies. You're not disappearing. You're protecting. Don't tell me what I'm doing. Her voice dropped, not in volume, but in temperature. I know what I'm doing at every moment. That has always been my problem with you, Junseok. You make decisions about my life, and then you present them as if they're logical conclusions rather than choices you made without asking me. She exhaled. You let me go without asking me. You watched me from a car without telling me. You sent vitamins without signing your name. You keep loving me in ways that cut me out of the conversation. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. He didn't fill it. He didn't defend himself or deflect or redirect the way she had expected. He sat with it, and that too was different, and she didn't know what to do with different. You're right, he said. She blinked. Once. All of it, he said. You're right about all of it. She looked at her coffee. That doesn't fix anything. No. It doesn't change what I want or what I need. I know. Then why say it? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, stripped of the professional smoothness. Because I spent 3 years not saying the true thing. And look where that put us. I'm trying to do something different. I'm bad at it, but I'm trying. Amina pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in this diner. She had made that decision in the elevator on the way down from the divorce signing, and she was going to hold it. What happens if I say no? She said. To the safe house. Then I increase the security presence here, discreetly. You won't see it, but it will be there. And if I tell you to stay out of my life entirely? A pause. I can't do that, not now, not with Xionghuan already moving. He held her gaze. I know that's not the answer you want. I'm giving it to you anyway. Because you've already decided what's best for me. Because someone is going to try to take you and use you and possibly hurt you, and I am not capable of standing aside and letting that happen. That's not nobility. That's just the truth. Amina sat back in the booth. The morning crowd was picking up around them. Construction workers, a pair of nurses still in scrubs from the night shift, a woman with a stroller navigating between the tables with the particular focused exhaustion of new motherhood. Amina watched them for a moment and then looked back at the man across from her and thought about what it meant to share a child with someone and hate their methods and understand, underneath the hate, exactly why they were doing it. I need time, she said. 2 days. You have one. Her eyes sharpened. Excuse me. His surveillance team ran a third pass on this block this morning. I had someone watching them watching you. 1 day, Amina. That's what the timing allows. She held his gaze for a long moment. Her jaw was tight, and her breathing was controlled, and she was furious in the specific way you're furious when someone is right about the wrong thing. Fine, she said. 1 day. She gathered her coat and her bag and stood. He started to rise, and she stopped him with a look. Stay, she said. Finish your coffee. Give me a head start. He sat back down. She walked out of May's diner at 8:23 without looking back, which cost her more than she would have admitted to anyone, and went home to pack a bag she had hoped never to need. The safe house was not what she had expected, which was a testament to the gap between what she imagined when she heard the word safe house and what Jun Seokang actually built when he decided something needed to be safe. It was a property outside a town called Millbrook, 90 miles north of the city, set back from a state road behind a long gravel drive and a line of old oaks that had been there longer than anyone currently alive could remember. The house itself was large and pale gray, farmhouse in its bones, but quietly reinforced in ways you had to know to look for. The way the window frames sat flush, the unobtrusive cameras housed in the exterior lighting fixtures, the perimeter that looked like a garden border and functioned as something considerably more intentional. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon. A woman named Jin met her at the door, mid-40s, compact, with the kind of stillness that comes from long practice at being underestimated. She was introduced as the house manager. Amina understood from the way Jin's eyes moved across the gravel drive before the door closed behind them that house manager covered a broader job description than the title implied. Her room was on the second floor. It was clean and warm and had a window that looked out over a field and the gray November sky beyond it, and it was nothing like a cell. And Amina sat on the edge of the bed and reminded herself of that. Her clients were told she was dealing with a family matter and would be working remotely for the foreseeable future. 3 of them were understanding. One of them, a tech startup founder who treated everyone around him as a service rather than a person, sent an email that made clear his patience had a shelf life. She responded with complete professionalism and the particular internal coldness of a woman who has learned to file certain feelings in a drawer and deal with them later. Jun Seok arrived the following evening. He didn't announce it. Jin simply told her that he was in the downstairs office, if she wanted to see him, and the if in that sentence was doing significant work. She went down. He was standing at the window in the room off the main hallway, looking out at the dark field with a glass of water in his hand. He heard her come in and turned, and there was a moment where neither of them spoke, and the house was very quiet around them. "How is it?" he said. "It's fine." She stopped in the middle of the room. "Your people are professional. Jin makes good tea." The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. "I'll tell her you said so." "Is there news?" The almost smile faded. Seong Hwan made contact with one of my finance people, a man named Bayek. He's been in my network for 7 years. He paused. He's been feeding information to Seong Hwan's organization for approximately the last 14 months. Amina felt the temperature of the conversation shift. "How much does he know?" "Enough. He knew about Dr. Park's dinner conversation. He knew where you lived before I changed the information in any system that might be monitored." He set down the glass of water on the windowsill. "We became aware of the breach this morning. And Bayek is being dealt with." She didn't ask. She had made a decision years ago about how much of that world she was going to allow herself to know, and the decision had been as little as functionally possible. "So Seong Hwan knows this address," she said. "Not yet. The data Beck had access to didn't include this property. It's held through 3 layers of shell structures that Beck didn't have clearance to." He paused. "But it extends his timeline only. It doesn't stop him." She absorbed this. Then, "Who else in your network might be compromised?" He was quiet for a moment that told her he had been asking himself the same question since morning and had not finished arriving at the answer. "I'm working on a full audit, but trust, once it has a fracture in it..." He stopped. "It's difficult to know where the crack ends." Amina looked at him. He was standing in the lamplight of the room with his jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he looked less like the man she had married, or rather, he looked more like the man underneath the man she had married, the one she had occasionally glimpsed at 3 in the morning or in the minute after he woke up and forgot to reassemble himself. "What are you afraid of?" she said. Not accusingly. A genuine question. He looked at her for a long moment. "That I built something that keeps hurting the people I..." He stopped, adjusted. "That the things I built can't be unwound fast enough." "Are you trying to unwind them?" "I've been trying for 2 years." He picked up the water glass again, more for something to do with his hands than because he wanted it. "It is not a fast process. Legitimate structures take time. The alternative is chaos that puts more people at risk than it removes." He looked at the glass. "I know that sounds like an excuse." It sounds like something that might be true and might also be convenient, Amina said. Both things can be real at once. He looked at her. Yes, they can. The room was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the oaks along the drive, a low sound like water, and somewhere further out a door, somewhere in the house closed, and neither of them moved. I want to ask you something, Amina said, and I need you to answer it without strategy, without thinking about what answer works best. He nodded once. When you signed those papers, were you relieved? The silence stretched. He set the glass down again. No, he said. Then why? Because I thought, he exhaled through his nose, a long breath. I thought you would be safer without my name on your life. I thought if Xiong Huan and the others looked at you and saw nothing connected to me, they would pass you by. He paused. I thought loving you from a distance was the same as protecting you. I understand now that it wasn't, that it was the same selfishness I accused myself of most, but kept doing anyway, making decisions for you while telling myself it was for you. He looked at the floor, then back up. It was the worst thing I've ever done, and I have done things that deserve that title. Amina's throat tightened. She did not let it show. Junseok. Yes. I spent 3 years feeling invisible in my own marriage. That did something to me. Something that doesn't unhappen because you say the right thing now. I know. I need you to know that whatever happens with Xiong Huan, whatever happens with the safety situation, I am not back. We are not back. I am here because my child's life is at risk, and you have the resources to address that. That's the entire transaction. I understand, he said. She studied his face. He meant it. That was the thing she had never been able to fully hate about him. He didn't lie to her face. He withheld. He managed. He controlled the temperature of every room he walked into, but when she asked him for the truth directly, he had never looked her in the eye and told her something he knew to be false. It was a very small thing to build on. She was trying very hard not to build on it. Good night, she said. Good night, Amina. She left the room. He stayed at the window for a long time after she was gone. At 11:47 that night, a message came through to Jun Seok's encrypted line. It was from a contact inside a police precinct in Queens. A man who had been on 2 payrolls for the better part of a decade and whose information had never once been wrong. The message was 4 lines. Jun Seok read it twice. Then he called his head of security, a man named Tae, who answered on the second ring. The Fulton Street Clinic, Jun Seok said. Xiong Huan's people broke in tonight. They took the files. A pause on the line. Which files? All of them, every patient record, every appointment schedule. He was already moving toward the door of the office, reaching for his jacket with the phone pressed to his ear. He has her OB's files. He has her name, her record, her scheduled appointments going back 3 months. He knows about the pregnancy in detail. He knows her blood type, her due date, her physician's direct line. He paused at the door. He has everything he needs to track her next move if she ever leaves this property. Tae was already issuing orders in the background. Jun Seok could hear the shift happening, the sound of a protective posture contracting around a single point. And there's one more thing, the contact's message had said. A second team had been identified entering the city from the south. Not surveillance. Equipment and numbers that didn't match observation. They were not here to watch. Jun Seok stood in the hallway of the safe house with the phone in his hand and the dark field visible through the window at the end of the corridor, and understood with absolute clarity that the timeline he thought he had was already gone, that Xiong Huan had not waited, had moved on multiple fronts simultaneously, and that somewhere in the next 24 to 48 hours, everything Jun Seok had spent 2 years trying to protect was going to be tested in ways he could not entirely predict or control. He walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up toward the second floor, where the light under Amina's door had gone dark an hour ago, and stood there in the silence of the house with the particular weight of a man who understands, for the first time completely, that the thing he is most afraid of losing is also the thing he is least equipped to keep safe by himself. Jun Seok did not sleep that night. He sat in the downstairs office with the encrypted laptop open and the lamp turned low and worked through the contact's message line by line the way he had learned to work through bad intelligence. Slowly, without panic, looking for the thing behind the thing. Panic was a luxury. He had never been able to afford it, and tonight was not the night to start. Tay called back at 12:40 with a secondary confirmation. The clinic break-in had been clean and fast. Under 7 minutes, no alarm triggered, the security system bypassed with equipment that cost more than most people made in a year. Professional. The kind of professional that didn't come cheap and didn't get used on soft targets. Seong Hwan had deployed serious resources on a medical records office, which meant the files were not the point. The files were the confirmation of something he already suspected. He wanted the due date. He wanted the physician's schedule. He wanted to know exactly when Amina would next be required to leave a controlled environment for a clinical one. That was the play. Not abduction from the safe house, which was hardened and staffed and would cost bodies. Abduction from a prenatal appointment, from a corridor in a clinic, from the particular vulnerability of a woman alone in a paper gown, waiting for a doctor who was already on Seong Hwan's radar as a point of access. Except she was no longer going to those appointments. She was here. Jun Seok closed the laptop and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and sat in the dark for 60 seconds, which was the closest he allowed himself to rest. Then he stood, went to the kitchen, made coffee, and began drafting new protocols with Tay for the property's external perimeter, extending the sensor range, repositioning 2 of the 4 overnight security personnel, establishing a secondary evacuation route through the eastern tree line to a vehicle cached on a logging road that Tay had identified 3 weeks ago during the initial site assessment. Jun Seok had not thought they would need it this soon. At 2 in the morning, Jin knocked on the office door and came in without waiting, which was not her habit, and told him something was wrong before she spoke. "Camera 4 is down," she said. "Northeast corner of the perimeter." He was out of his chair before she finished the sentence. The northeast corner covered the approach from the state road through a gap in the tree line, the one section of the perimeter that relied on natural coverage supplemented by electronics, rather than the physical barriers that protected the other 3 sides. Camera 4 going down meant one of 2 things: equipment failure or deliberate interference. Tay was already outside when Jun Seok reached the back door, moving with 2 of the night security men toward the camera position with the focused economy of people who have trained for exactly this. The night was cold and very dark, the kind of dark that exists only this far outside a city, where the sky sits heavy and the fields absorb what little light there is. Jun Seok's breath came out in white plumes. His heart rate was elevated, and he knew it and controlled it the way he controlled everything. By decision, not by instinct. The camera had been cut, not failed. Cut with a tool, at the mounting bracket, clean and deliberate. Whoever had done it was gone. No sound in the tree line, no movement visible on the remaining cameras. Tay swept the perimeter with 2 men and came back in 4 minutes with nothing. "A test," Tay said quietly, beside Jun Seok in the dark, at the edge of the field. "They're mapping our response time." "Or a distraction," Jun Seok said. They looked at each other, then they both moved back toward the house at a pace that wasn't quite running but wasn't anything less. Amina's room was dark, and her door was closed, and when Jun Seok knocked, she took 7 seconds to answer, which he counted, and opened the door with the look of someone who had not been fully asleep, the hypervigilance of a woman whose body had been running threat assessments even in the dark. "What happened?" she said. She was in a sweater and sweatpants, and her hair was loose, and she was holding her phone already. "Perimeter test? Possibly a probe. You need to move to the interior room on the ground floor." He said it evenly. No alarm in his voice, because alarm was contagious and she needed to be functional. "It's the most protected space in the house. Jin will stay with you." "And you?" "I'll be working the situation." She studied his face for a moment with the focused intelligence that had always made her formidable, the ability to read the gap between what someone was saying and what was actually happening. Then she nodded and reached for the go bag that Jin had prepared for her on the first day, which told him she had identified it and filed its location without being instructed to. and he felt something tighten in his chest that he chose not to examine. She was halfway down the stairs when her phone buzzed. She looked at it, stopped. "It's Dr. Park," she said. Junseok stopped 2 steps below her. At 2 in the morning, she looked up from the phone. Something moved through her expression. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to it, the moment before the body decides what it's feeling. "He says he needs to talk to me, that it's urgent." She paused. "That he's sorry." The word sorry landed in the stairwell between them with the particular weight of a word that arrives too late. Junseok held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment and then gave him the phone. He called the number back. Dr. Park answered on the first ring, and the sound of his breathing told Junseok immediately that the man was frightened. "Talk," Junseok said. A pause. Then, in a voice stripped of its dinner party warmth, "They came to see me. 2 men. 3 days ago." Another pause. "They had photographs of my family, my daughter's school. They knew her teacher's name." His voice cracked on the last word and then steadied with visible effort. "They told me what they wanted. I said no at first. I said no twice." Junseok said nothing. He waited. "They called again yesterday morning. They said if I didn't provide the information they wanted, they would..." He stopped. "I have a daughter. She's 9 years old." "What information?" Junseok said. His voice was very quiet. "The appointment schedule. Your..." Another stop. "Amina's next prenatal appointment. The date. The time. The clinic location, which she'd already changed to a different practice in Midtown." He exhaled. "They already had most of it. They just needed the confirmation of the new address, the new physician's name." Junseok became very still. Below him, from the ground floor, he could hear Jin's quiet footsteps crossing the kitchen. The house was otherwise silent. "When did you give it to them?" he said. Silence on the line. 3 seconds. 4. "Yesterday afternoon," Dr. Park said. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I have a..." Junseok ended the call. He stood on the staircase holding Amina's phone for a moment, with the particular internal stillness of a man recalculating everything at once. The clinic break-in had been a cover, a piece of theater designed to make him believe Seong Hwan was working from stolen records when the actual source was already in place, already compromised, already delivering exactly what was needed. And the camera on the northeast perimeter, cut clean and left without pursuit. He looked up at Amina, who had been watching his face through the entire call and reading it. "He gave them something," she said. Not a question. "The new clinic. The new appointment time." He handed back her phone. "They know you changed practices. They know where you're going next." "When is next?" "Tomorrow," he said. 10 a.m. The silence between them was brief and complete. Then Amina said, "They were never going to take me from here. This whole time they were waiting for the appointment." "Yes." "And now they know I won't be going. They'll adjust. Seong Hwan adjusts." He came back up the 2 steps to her level, and she didn't move back, which was something. "The camera going down tonight. They were not probing our response time. They were confirming we're still here, that you haven't relocated again." He watched her process this. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were moving over the middle distance in the way that meant she was thinking rather than reacting. And even now, in this staircase at 2 in the morning, with everything contracting around them, he found himself recognizing that quality in her and feeling the specific pain of a man who understands too late what he had. "So what do we do?" she said. "I need to make some calls. I need you in the interior room." He paused. "And I need to tell you something first." She looked at him. He had been trying to decide since midnight whether to say this, and he had decided against it 3 times, and he was going to say it anyway because he was done making decisions for her based on what he thought she could handle. Tay ran a full audit this afternoon of everyone with knowledge of this location. He paused. The audit turned up an anomaly. What kind of anomaly? A phone call, made 4 days ago from a prepaid number registered to a woman named Song Yuna. The call lasted 6 minutes. He stopped. Song Yuna is a name that last appeared in a transaction record connected to Seong Hwan's organization 14 months ago. Amina stared at him. Someone here called Seong Hwan's network. Not directly, through a relay, but yes. Who? He held her gaze. The call was made from Jin's personal phone. The staircase went absolutely quiet. Somewhere outside, wind moved through the oaks. The house creaked once in the cold, a deep structural sound like a breath. Amina looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her assembling the implications with the same methodical intelligence she brought to everything, building the picture, testing it, accepting it when it held. She's been with you how long? Amina said. 8 years. And you didn't know? No. The word cost him something. He didn't hide it. I didn't know. Amina looked at the wall beside her for a moment, then back at him. Where is she now? Downstairs in the kitchen. He paused. She doesn't know we know. And the interior room you were about to put me in? Amina's voice was flat and precise. That's where she was going to take me. He said nothing, which was its own answer. Amina pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, not in distress, in the particular gesture of someone physically containing a response that has no useful outlet. Then she lowered her hand and straightened and said, Okay, what do we actually do? They moved quickly and quietly. Jun Seok sent a text to Tae that read secondary protocol in 2 words, which meant approach from the east, do not enter through the main ground floor, stand by at the tree line. He took Amina back to her room, which he had already determined was safer than the interior room Jin had been steering them toward, and stayed in the doorway while he called Tae directly. Tae had Jin contained within 4 minutes. It happened in the kitchen, without violence. 2 of Tae's men came through the rear exterior door, while a third came in from the hallway. And Jin, who was standing at the counter with her hands wrapped around a mug, looked at the 3 men and set the mug down with the particular composure of someone who had known this moment was a possibility and had already decided how she would meet it. Jun Seok came downstairs. He stood across the kitchen island from her, and Jin looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not guilt, not fear, but something more complicated. Something that looked almost like exhaustion. How long? He said. She didn't pretend. That at least was something. 14 months. Seong Hwan. His people approached me after your expansion into the Westchester accounts. They knew things about my background that I had told no one. She paused. My brother owes a debt to a network that Seong Hwan controls. A substantial debt. They offered to clear it. Your brother. Jun Seok said it without inflection. He has children. Her voice didn't shake. 3 of them. The youngest is 4. He looked at her for a long time. 8 years. She had sat across from him at security briefings, had managed 3 safe houses before this one, had driven vehicles and secured locations and stood between him and threats she was simultaneously feeding information about. 8 years of proximity, and he had not seen it. That failure belonged to him entirely, and he knew it. What did you give them? He said. The location of this property, the staffing schedule, the camera positions. She paused. The interior room layout. He understood then, completely and with nauseating clarity, what the interior room had been set up for. Not to protect Amina, to deliver her to a position in the house where the camera blind spots aligned with the window on the north wall, and where a team coming through the tree line would have had a clear approach with the minimum response time from Tae's people. It had been designed as a trap inside the safe house. Inside his safe house. Inside something he had built with his own resources and trusted because it was his. Jin was watching his face. I told them she was here 3 days ago, she said. They told me to wait for the appointment call to confirm she wouldn't be leaving. When I got the signal that the appointment was confirmed, the camera, he said, was the signal for them to move to position. Yes. He turned away from her and stood with his hands flat on the counter and breathed through his nose for 5 seconds. Not from anger alone, from the vertigo of understanding how completely the ground had shifted beneath him. Seong Hwan had not been circling. He had been inside. For 14 months, he had been inside, walking through Jun Seok's operational structure with a copied key and patient, meticulous intent. Every decision Jun Seok had made in the last 3 months, the safe house, the timing, the personnel choices, had been visible, had been fed back, had been used to construct a trap that was not aimed at Jun Seok's organization. It was aimed at the woman upstairs. Tae stepped close and said quietly, "They'll be in position by now, waiting on Jin's signal." "Which won't come," Jun Seok said. "No, but when it doesn't come on schedule, they'll know something went wrong." "How long before they move, anyway?" Tae checked his watch. 20 minutes, maybe 30 if their commander is cautious. 20 minutes. 20 minutes in a house that had been architecturally mapped by the enemy, with a perimeter that had already been partially probed, with a team outside in the dark that knew the camera positions and the staff count and the layout of every room. Jun Seok straightened up from the counter. He looked at Tae. Then he looked at the ceiling, above which Amina was sitting on the edge of a bed in the dark, one hand against her abdomen, waiting. Everything he had built to protect her had been built on a foundation that someone else had already dug out from underneath. Every layer of security, every protocol, every carefully maintained structure, infiltrated, mapped, and turned. He had spent 15 years constructing walls, and the walls had become a cage. He took the stairs 2 at a time and pushed open her door without knocking, and she stood up immediately from the bed and looked at his face. And her face told him she already knew it was worse. "We have to go," he said. "Right now, out the east side through the trees. There's a vehicle on the logging road." He crossed to the window and checked the angle of approach. Still clear, the field dark and empty. "Tae will run interference from the house. We move in 3 minutes." She already had the go bag on her shoulder. He looked at her, standing in the lamplight with her coat half on and her jaw set and her eyes absolutely clear, carrying his child in more composure than most trained men he knew could manage in this moment, and felt something move through him that was not tactical and not strategic and had no name. He was willing to give it in the next 3 minutes. "Amina," he said. "Later," she said. "Move." They went out through the east window onto the roof of the garden extension, dropped 4 feet to the ground, and ran toward the tree line with the cold air cutting at their faces and the dark closing around them, while behind them the house that had been built to keep her safe began to fill with the sound of men who had been told it was time to come in from the cold. The tree line was 40 meters from the house, and it took them 11 seconds to cross it. Jun Seok ran with his hand on Amina's arm, not gripping, not pulling, just contact, a point of reference in the dark. And she ran without hesitation, without stumbling, her breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts that told him she was managing her body deliberately the way athletes manage it, not fighting the cold air but working with it. The go bag bounced against her hip. The field under their feet was frozen ground and dead grass and uneven in ways that wanted to turn an ankle, and he kept his hand on her arm and they ran. The tree line swallowed them, oak and pine, close set, the canopy blocking what little ambient light the clouded sky offered. Jun Seok switched to the small tactical flashlight he had pulled from the office desk, red lens, minimum signature, and moved them northeast along a path he had walked once in daylight 3 weeks ago and was now reconstructing from memory and the feel of the ground. Behind them, the house was still lit and quiet. Not for long. His phone buzzed. Tae, one word, moving. Seong Hwan's team was coming in from the northwest approach, the gap where camera 4 had been cut. Tae had 4 men inside and was holding the main floor. The calculation was brutal, and both of them had made it without discussing it. Tae's job was not to win. It was to buy time and noise, to make Seong Hwan's people commit to the house while Jun Seok got Amina to the logging road. The logging road was 600 meters through the trees. In daylight, an easy 5-minute walk. In the dark, on frozen ground, with Amina 22 weeks pregnant and both of them running from people who had planned this for months, it was something else entirely. She didn't slow down. That was the thing that lodged in his chest even while he was moving. She did not slow down. She kept pace, breathing hard, navigating the uneven ground with her free hand out for balance when the path dropped, her jaw set against the cold and whatever else she was carrying. They were 300 meters in when they heard the first shots from the house. Distant, flat cracks in the cold air, the particular sound of suppressed weapons that carried across open ground with less drama than people expected. Then a burst without suppression, louder, closer to what people imagined, and then a pause, and then more. Amina flinched at the first shot. She didn't stop. "Tae," Junseok said, not slowing. "I know," she said. They kept moving. The logging road appeared as a gap in the tree line, a slightly paler dark against the solid dark of the woods, two tire tracks separated by a ridge of frozen grass. The vehicle was a dark gray SUV parked nose out against a stand of birch at the road's edge. Junseok had the key. He had it in his hand already, had pulled it from his jacket pocket while they ran, and he hit the unlock button before they were fully clear of the trees. He put Amina in the passenger seat and went around the front and got behind the wheel and started the engine in one motion and pulled onto the logging road without lights. "GPS off," he said. "Done." She already had the phone out, had already switched it to airplane mode, had already thought ahead to what mattered. He would not stop being surprised by her, and he had given up trying. He drove by the red flashlight propped against the dash, which gave just enough illumination to see the road 4 feet ahead. Slow. Brutally slow. The logging road wound for a kilometer before it met a county road, and the county road was the first moment they would be visible to anyone with aerial surveillance or a positioned vehicle. His phone rang. Not Tae's number. An unknown number that was nonetheless in his encrypted directory. He answered it on speaker. "You ran." Ryu Sung-hwan's voice was low and even, and had the particular quality of a man who is not surprised by anything because he has already planned for all of it. "I wondered if you would." Junseok said nothing. He kept driving. "I want to clarify something," Seong-hwan said. "This has never been about the woman. She is a means. I want you to understand that so you don't make this more personal than it needs to be." "Where are you?" Junseok said. A pause. Then, almost amused, "Close." Junseok looked in the rearview mirror. Dark road, dark trees, nothing visible. He looked at the county road junction ahead, still 200 meters, and checked the mirror again. Headlights. Coming onto the logging road from behind, one vehicle moving fast. "They had a second team," Amina said. Her voice was flat and precise. "On the logging road." "Yes," Seong-hwan said through the phone. "The road was always the exit point. You chose it 3 weeks ago. We noted it." A brief pause. "There is also a vehicle waiting at the county road junction. I want you to know so that we don't have a violent misunderstanding. There are 3 people in that vehicle, and I would prefer not to use them." Junseok stopped the SUV, not because he was surrendering, because he was thinking, and thinking required 1 second of stillness. The headlights behind them were 150 meters back. The junction ahead was dark, but Seong-hwan had said a vehicle was waiting, which meant it was positioned without lights. Amina looked at him. Not with fear, with the focused question of someone waiting for a plan. He had one. It was not a good plan. It was the plan that existed given what they had, which was an SUV on a dark road between 2 positions, a tactical flashlight, the contents of a go bag he hadn't opened, and 400 meters of tree line on the right side of the road that the county road vehicle had not yet closed off, because Seong-hwan had expected them to stop when he called. "Get out on the right side," he said quietly. "Stay low, stay in the trees, move south parallel to the county road. There's a farm property 800 meters south with a visible light on the main building. I saw it on the satellite map. You get there, you get inside, you call 911, and you do not open the door for anyone until there are uniformed officers on the other side." "And you," she said. He was already reaching across her to open the glove box. Inside was a handgun, a Glock 19, which he had put there 3 weeks ago when he staged the vehicle, and which he now checked with the mechanical efficiency of long practice. "Junseok." "Go," he said. "That's not an answer." He looked at her. In the red light of the flashlight, her face was all angles and shadow, and the particular set of a woman who has decided she is not going to be managed. "I'm going to give them something to chase," he said. "I'm going to drive forward and make enough noise that the vehicle at the junction has to commit. And while they're committing, you're already in the trees and moving south. By the time they realize, they'll know immediately, she said. The car will only have one person in it. They can see heat signatures. These people have equipment. You said so yourself. Amina, I'm not leaving you alone in this car. She said it without heat, without drama, simply. That is not a negotiation. So think of something that doesn't require me to run through a field alone in the dark at 22 weeks pregnant, because that plan ends with me on the ground, and you dead, and our child without either of us. The headlights behind them were 100 meters now, slowing, cautious, which meant the driver was professional and wasn't going to rear-end them and give up the positional advantage. Xianghuan was still on the phone. Still silent, waiting. Jun Seok made a decision. He made it the way he had made every decision for 15 years, alone, at speed, with incomplete information. Except that this time the decision was not about his own survival, and that made it the hardest one he had ever made. He drove forward, fast, full lights on. He hit the county road junction at 60 kilometers an hour and turned left, south, away from the main road, away from the town, deeper into the rural dark. And the vehicle that had been waiting at the junction, positioned to block the right turn toward the highway, had to reverse and reposition, and in those 4 seconds Jun Seok had a gap. Not a large gap. Enough. He drove hard for 200 meters and then turned the SUV off the county road onto a farm track, unpaved, lined with fence posts, leading toward a cluster of low buildings he had seen on the satellite map as a dark rectangle and was now resolving in the headlights as a working farm, a barn, and 2 outbuildings, and a house with a light in the window. He killed the headlights and killed the engine, and they sat in the sudden dark and silence with both pursuit vehicles still on the county road, their headlights sweeping the wrong direction. He had 30 seconds, maybe 40. Inside the barn, he said. Now. They moved. The barn door was unlocked. A rusted latch, no padlock. The door swinging inward on a hinge that protested the cold. Inside it smelled of hay and diesel and the particular animal warmth of a space that housed livestock. Jun Seok pulled the door mostly closed behind them, and they stood in the dark and breathed. Amina's breath was audible, controlled but audible. He put his hand on her arm and felt her pulse through the layers of her coat, rapid but strong, and she pressed her back against the barn wall and closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and then opened them and nodded. Outside, headlights swept across the farm track junction, paused, then came on slowly down the track. They had been seen, or the track had been noticed. Either way, the pursuit had found the turn. His phone buzzed. Tay. He answered it with the phone against his ear, no speaker. Talk. Tay's voice was rough and had a quality it didn't usually have. Pain, or the voice that sits just behind pain. 3 of theirs down. I'm hit. Left side, not critical. A pause that wasn't quite steady. There are 4 of them still in the house and 2 vehicles on the east perimeter. We have the upstairs, but not the main floor. Hold what you have, Jun Seok said. Understood. Another pause. And boss. The call you're going to want to make. I already made it, Jun Seok said. He had, in the 3 minutes before they left the house, a single text to a number he had not used in 2 years. A debt owed to him by a man who ran federal logistics through channels that were cleaner than they appeared. That text would take time to produce results. An hour, maybe more. Hold the upstairs, he said, and ended the call. The headlights were at the barn now. The vehicle stopped outside. Doors. 2 sets of footsteps on frozen ground. Jun Seok moved Amina toward the back of the barn, past stacked hay bales, past a tractor that sat inert and enormous in the dark, past a wooden partition that separated the main floor from a rear section that held tools and feed. He put her behind the partition and pressed the Glock into her hand. She looked at it, then at him. Point and pull, he said. You know how. I haven't fired one since the mechanism hasn't changed. He held her gaze. If someone who is not me comes through that partition, you use it. You don't wait. You don't ask questions. She looked at the gun. Her jaw was tight, and her hands were steady, and she nodded once. He went back to the main floor of the barn. The door came open before he reached it. The first man through moved well, low, fast, sweeping the visible space with a weapon-mounted light before his body was fully committed to the threshold. Jun Seok was behind the tractor, pressed flat against the cold metal, and the sweep passed 2 feet from him in the dark. He let the man get 3 steps in. Then he moved. It was close and brutal, and it was over in less than 10 seconds. In the way that real violence is nothing like what people who haven't experienced it imagine. No choreography, no space, just two bodies in the dark resolving a situation through the most direct physical means available. Jun Seok took a hit to the ribs from an elbow that felt like being struck with a pipe and answered it with a knee and used the man's own momentum to put him into the tractor's front axle. The sound was bad. The man went down and did not get up. The second man was already through the door. He had the weapon light on, and he had enough training to not come to the sound. He went left, cleared the left side, and caught Jun Seok with the light as Jun Seok was still standing over the first man. A beat. Both of them still. "Down," the man said. His English was accented. Korean, the same specific region Jun Seok recognized from a decade of listening to men from that part of the country. Seong Hwan recruited from one network. He always had. Jun Seok looked at the weapon light. Behind it, a face he couldn't fully read. Young, controlled. Someone who had been told what this assignment was and had accepted it the way soldiers accept things, as a task with parameters. "Your boss is on my phone," Jun Seok said. He still had the phone in his left hand. He held it up slightly. "Call him. Ask him how this ends." The man didn't waver. "Down, last time." Jun Seok went to one knee slowly, watching the man's hands, watching the weapon light for the shift that would precede a shot, the slight correction of aim that a person makes when they commit to firing as opposed to threatening. There was a difference. He had learned to read it. His phone rang. Not vibration. Ring. Loud in the silence of the barn, absurd and ordinary, the default tone he had never bothered to change. Both of them looked at it involuntarily for half a second. Half a second was what Jun Seok had been waiting for. He moved right and low as the shot came. It passed close enough to his head that he felt the air shift, a sensation he had experienced twice before in his life, and hoped each time was the last. And he covered the ground between them in 2 strides, and took the man's weapon arm at the wrist with both hands, and used the arm against the joint until the weapon hit the dirt floor, and then it was close again, close and brutal and dark. And this time the resolution took longer and cost more, because this man was bigger and had more left in him and knew what he was doing. When it was over, Jun Seok was on his hands and knees on the barn floor, breathing in great ragged pulls, his ribs screaming from the earlier blow, a cut above his left eye that he couldn't quite account for bleeding freely down the side of his face and dropping in dark spots on the dirt beneath him. He stayed there for 5 seconds, counted them. Then he stood. "Jun Seok," Amina's voice from behind the partition, controlled but tight. "Here," he said. "Stay there." He retrieved the second man's weapon, a compact submachine gun with a suppressor and 2 remaining magazines, and moved to the barn door and looked out. The vehicle the 2 men had arrived in sat empty on the farm track. Beyond it, at the county road junction, he could see 2 sets of headlights moving, not toward the farm, but in a pattern that told him Seong Hwan was repositioning, pulling his people back from the house toward this location, concentrating force here now that the farm had been identified. He counted the headlights. 2 vehicles. Estimating 2 to 3 personnel per vehicle. Against him, alone. In a barn on frozen ground with a cut eye and ribs that felt like something was cracked, and Amina behind a wooden partition, and no tactical support until Tay's people could disengage from the house. His phone screen lit up in his hand. A text from the number he'd messaged 2 years ago. 3 words. 15 minutes out. 15 minutes. He went to the partition and pulled it open and looked at Amina. She looked back. Her face was completely composed in the way that is not the absence of fear, but the decision to do something with it instead. "How bad?" she said. She meant his face, his ribs. "Manageable." He was aware it was probably not the most convincing thing he had ever said, given the blood. She reached into the go bag without being asked and pulled out a folded cloth. A scarf, practical, something Jin had packed with the efficiency of someone who understood that go bags needed to cover contingencies, and stepped forward and pressed it to the cut above his eye. Her hand was steady. Her face was a foot from his. He could feel her breath. "There are more coming," he said. "I know. I have support arriving in 15 minutes. I need to hold this position until then." "Okay?" She didn't move the cloth from his eye. She looked at him with the focused directness she brought to every hard thing. "Tell me what I can do." He put his hand over hers, the one pressing the cloth to his face, and held it there for a moment. Not strategically, just for a moment. Then a vehicle's headlights swept across the barn wall through the gaps in the siding, and the moment was over, and Ryu Seong-hwan's voice came from outside in the cold. Not through the phone this time, projected directly, the voice of a man standing 20 meters from the barn door in the dark, saying, quietly but clearly enough to carry, "Kang Jun-seok, I am going to give you one opportunity to make a choice that does not end with everyone in that barn in a body bag. I suggest you listen carefully, because I am not a patient man by nature, and I have been patient for a very long time." Jun-seok looked at the barn door, then at Amina, then at the weapon in his hand and the blood on the floor, and the 15 minutes that stood between where they were and any version of this that ended differently. He walked to the barn door and put his hand on the latch and looked back at her one more time. She was standing in the middle of the barn floor, go bag on her shoulder, the Glock in her right hand, utterly still, watching him with eyes that held no plea and no surrender, and something else he recognized but had spent 3 years pretending he didn't need. And he opened the door and stepped out into the cold to face the man who had been dismantling his world from the inside for 14 months, with nothing left to bargain with except the truth that he was not going back inside that barn without. The cold hit him like a wall. Jun-seok stepped out of the barn and onto the frozen ground and let the door fall mostly shut behind him, and he stood there in the dark with the suppressed submachine gun held low at his side, and blood drying on the left side of his face, and his ribs sending a specific sharp message with every breath that told him something was cracked but not broken. And he looked at Ryu Seong-hwan. Seong-hwan was standing 20 meters away on the farm track, exactly as his voice had suggested. Unhurried, centered, the posture of a man who had arranged the geometry of this moment in advance and was comfortable in it. He was shorter than Jun-seok had imagined from 14 months of intelligence reports and surveillance photographs. Compact, 50s, with the kind of physical stillness that comes not from calm, but from extreme self-discipline applied over many years to a nature that was not calm at all. He wore a dark coat, no visible weapon, which meant the visible weapon was not the one to worry about. Behind him, 2 of his men flanked the track at a distance. Beyond them, the headlights of the repositioned vehicles illuminated the frozen grass in cold white bars. They looked at each other across the dark. "You're bleeding," Seong-hwan said. "Your people are worse," Jun-seok said. A brief pause. Not amusement exactly. Something adjacent to it, the expression of a man who appreciates precision. "2 of my men are dead. 2 more will require medical attention. I want to be clear that I am accounting for this in how I proceed." "Then proceed." Seong-hwan tilted his head slightly. "You have support coming. 12 minutes now, I'd estimate, if you sent the text when I think you sent it." He paused. "I also have support coming. More than yours." So the question of who wins the numerical engagement at minute 12 is already answered. "Then what are we doing out here?" Jun-seok said. "Talking." Seong-hwan took 1 step forward. Not aggressive, deliberate. "You have something in that barn that I no longer need." The sentence landed in the cold air, and Jun-seok's grip on the weapon tightened almost imperceptibly. "Say that again." "I said I no longer need her." Seong-hwan's voice was even. "The calculation changed in the last 20 minutes. Your federal contact, the logistics man you messaged, he is already known to 2 of my financial partners in ways that will accelerate his cooperation with them rather than with you. His 15 minutes becomes 40, maybe more." He paused. "And Tae, your head of security, the one holding your upstairs, he is hit worse than he told you. My people inside the house have confirmed it. He will not hold another 30 minutes. Jun-seok said nothing. He was listening for what was underneath the information, for the shape of what Seong-hwan actually wanted, because this was not a man who came to a barn in the dark on frozen ground to deliver a status report. "What I need from you," Seong-hwan said, is an acknowledgement, public, documented, and verifiable, delivered through the three financial networks that both our organizations use as neutral infrastructure, that the Westchester accounts belong to my network going forward. The expansion you made 14 months ago, you retract it. You pull your people out and you don't replace them. He stopped. That's it. That's the whole thing. You spent 14 months on this, Jun-seok said. You put a source inside my organization for over a year. You broke into a medical clinic. You positioned 2 teams on a rural property in November and drove them into a firefight over one building in Westchester. It's a significant building, Seong-hwan said. It's a building that channels 8% of my cash flow, which is why it matters. Seong-hwan paused. You are a practical man, Kang. You have always been a practical man. So I am making you a practical offer. Sign the Westchester accounts over, confirm it through channels that both our people will recognize, and I walk away from this farm and we go back to the arrangement we had 4 years ago, before your expansion. Uncomfortable, but functional. And the woman, Jun-seok said. Seong-hwan's expression shifted. Something moved across it that was almost difficult to read in the dark and the distance. Not contempt exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has observed something he did not expect and is not sure yet what to do with it. She was leverage, he said. She was the mechanism I selected because it was the most efficient one available to me. If the mechanism is no longer necessary, say it plainly, Jun-seok said. The same words Amina had used to him in the diner 3 weeks ago, and he heard the echo of them in his own mouth and thought it was the most honest thing he'd borrowed in a long time. Seong-hwan looked at him. The woman goes free. The child goes free. You sign the accounts, and everyone goes home. The farm track was very quiet. In the tree line to the east, something moved. Wind or animal, impossible to tell. One of the vehicles behind Seong-hwan idled faintly, its exhaust a pale thread in the cold air. Jun-seok looked at the man in front of him and ran the calculation. Not because he was seriously running it. He had made the decision the moment he stepped out of the barn. But because there was a version of Jun-seok Kang who would have run it seriously, who would have weighed 8% of cash flow against a threat and found a number, and he wanted to mark the distance between that man and the man standing here now. No, he said. Seong-hwan's expression didn't change. No. You don't get a deal. You don't get the accounts. You get nothing from me except the opportunity to walk away from this farm before my support arrives. And the federal involvement you do not want becomes the kind that's difficult to manage. He kept his voice level. You put a source inside my organization for 14 months. You threatened a physician's daughter. You positioned men outside a property where a pregnant woman was sleeping. There is no number you can put on a table that I'm going to sign. A pause. Long. Seong-hwan looked at him with an expression that had moved from calculation to something older and less manageable. You understand what you're choosing, Seong-hwan said. I understand exactly what I'm choosing, Jun-seok said. What happened next took 4 seconds and reorganized the geometry of the farm track completely. Seong-hwan's right hand moved, not for a visible weapon, but for his coat's interior, and the man on his left moved simultaneously, raising a weapon that had been held low and outside the headlight range, and Jun-seok dropped to the left and brought up the submachine gun, and the night came apart in a series of flat percussive sounds and moving bodies, and the specific chaos of close-range engagement in the dark, where training and instinct become the same thing. The man on the left went down. The second flanker was moving, and Jun-seok tracked him and fired twice, and the second man hit the ground and did not move. Seong-hwan had a handgun out, and he was good with it. A shot that caught the frozen ground 2 feet from Jun-seok's left boot as Jun-seok rolled behind the cover of the dead men's vehicle. Then from the barn behind him came a sound that stopped everything for a half-second. A single shot, the Glock he had pressed into Amina's hand, and the fourth man who had been coming around the north side of the barn toward the door, dropped his weapon and sat down hard in the frost-killed grass and did not get up. Silence. Seong-hwan was behind his own vehicle on the track, using it as cover, and they were in a stalemate with 20 meters of open ground between them and the lights of Seong-hwan's last remaining vehicle at the track junction doing nothing useful for either of them. The woman can shoot, Seong-hwan said from behind the vehicle. His voice had changed, tighter, the composed quality strained now. Yes, Jun-seok said. A pause. You have 3 minutes, maybe 4, before my second support team arrives. You have 10 before mine does, Jun-seok said. Your estimate was wrong. Another pause. Longer. Kang. Seong-hwan's voice from behind the vehicle now had something in it that Jun-seok had never heard in any of the intelligence recordings. A quality that was not quite the thing it resembled, but was close enough that Jun-seok named it to himself as the first honest thing he had ever heard from the man. Exhaustion. This is not sustainable. No, Jun-seok said. It isn't. I have been building this for 11 years. I know. You expanded into my territory. I did. That was the beginning of this. Yes. He kept his back against the vehicle, and his eyes on the farm track junction, and his breathing measured. But it's not the reason we're here. We're here because you chose a pregnant woman as a mechanism. That's where this went past business. The silence that followed was 40 seconds long. Jun-seok counted them. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the county road. Not from the south where Seong-hwan's second team was coming from, but from the north. Multiple vehicles moving fast, and the light bars on top of 2 of them told him what they were before he could hear the sirens, which came a moment later, cutting across the cold night air with the particular authority that made the calculation simple for everyone still standing. Seong-hwan's last vehicle at the junction accelerated away south without waiting. Whatever second team had been coming from that direction was suddenly in the path of law enforcement, and that changed their arithmetic entirely. Seong-hwan stood up from behind his vehicle. He stood there on the farm track with a handgun at his side, looking at the approaching lights, and then he looked at Jun-seok, and his face in the mixed light of headlights and approaching sirens was the face of a man who has arrived at the last room in a building he spent years constructing and found it empty. He raised the handgun. Jun-seok was already moving, not away, forward, closing the 20 meters at a run, because a man raising a weapon at distance is a different problem than a man with a weapon at close range. And he had made this calculation before, and he was across the ground before Seong-hwan had fully committed to the aim, and the gun discharged once into the cold air above his left shoulder as he took Seong-hwan's weapon arm and forced it down and put the man against the hood of his own vehicle with his arm behind him and held him there. Seong-hwan did not struggle. He had the intelligence to understand when the physical argument was concluded. They stayed like that, Jun-seok's weight against Seong-hwan's back, both of them breathing hard, the sirens now very close, the blue and red light beginning to color the frost on the ground around them. And Seong-hwan said something into the metal hood of the vehicle that Jun-seok had to lower his head to hear. You're going to dismantle everything you built, Seong-hwan said. For her. For a woman who hasn't forgiven you. Yes, Jun-seok said. That's not strength. That's just a different kind of losing. Jun-seok said nothing. The lights were on them now, the vehicles coming up the farm track, doors opening, voices. He kept Seong-hwan against the hood until he felt the hands of other people taking over, and then he stepped back and let them, and he stood in the cold and the light and pressed his left hand against his ribs and breathed. From the barn doorway, Amina was standing with the Glock held correctly at her side, muzzle down, watching the law enforcement personnel spread across the farm track with the focused attention of someone who has been in a situation for long enough that the arrival of help feels like a fact to be verified rather than a relief to be felt. Jin had told her to go to the interior room. Seong-hwan had planned for 14 months. Dr. Park had been frightened into betrayal by the photograph of a 9-year-old girl. She had processed all of it in the hours in the barn, and she was still processing it, standing in the doorway with the cold air on her face and the gun at her side and her free hand resting against her abdomen. Jun-seok walked across the frost-killed grass to the barn door and stopped in front of her. He looked terrible, say. The cut above his eye had crusted dark, his jacket was torn at the shoulder, and he was holding his left side with a careful stillness that told her about the ribs without her needing to ask. His face was the face of a man who had spent everything he had and was standing in the deficit. He looked at her hand on her abdomen, then at her face. The baby, he said. Is fine, she said. I'm fine. She paused. You should sit down. In a minute. Jun Seok, sit down. He sat down on the barn threshold. Not gracefully, the kind of sitting down that a body does when it has been negotiating with gravity for several hours and has finally run out of argument. He sat with his back against the doorframe and his legs out in front of him on the frozen ground, and his head back against the wood and his eyes closed. Amina stood beside him and looked out at the farm track where law enforcement was processing a scene that was going to generate a considerable amount of paperwork and several phone calls between agencies that did not usually cooperate. The man who had planned for 14 months was in handcuffs at the back of a vehicle. The men on the ground were being attended to. She slid down the doorframe and sat beside Jun Seok on the threshold. Their shoulders were touching. He didn't open his eyes. The federal contact, she said. The text you sent. That's how they got here so fast. Yes, he owed me a significant favor. This cleared it. And Seong Hwan's claim that the man was already compromised. Jun Seok was quiet for a moment. Partially true. Enough to complicate the clean version of tonight. There will be conversations. He paused. Lawyers, depositions, the kind of official scrutiny that my organization has historically preferred to avoid. She looked at the side of his face. And I'm going to cooperate with it. He said it without inflection. The whole structure, the accounts, the shell companies, the networks that run underneath the legitimate businesses. I'm going to give the right people enough information to dismantle the parts that can't be converted into something legitimate. And I'm going to spend the next several years turning what remains into something that doesn't require anyone to disappear. She was quiet. In the distance, an ambulance light appeared at the county road junction, moving toward them. That's not a small thing, she said. No. It will cost you most of what you built. Yes. And the people who depend on the structure for I know what it will cost. He opened his eyes and looked at the dark sky above the farm. I've been calculating it for 2 years. I told you I was trying to unwind it. I was. Slowly. Too slowly. He paused. Tonight accelerated the timeline. She looked at her hands in her lap. The Glock was on the ground beside her. Somewhere in the barn behind them, one of the animals shifted and made a sound that was almost comforting in its ordinariness. Jun Seok. Yes. What Seong Hwan said to you, just before they took him. She had been watching from the doorway. She had not heard the words, but she had seen his face. What was it? He was quiet for a moment. Then, he said, dismantling everything for a woman who hasn't forgiven me is just a different kind of losing. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, he was wrong about the second part. He turned his head and looked at her. She was looking straight ahead at the farm track and the lights and the organized aftermath of a very bad night, and her jaw was set and her eyes were clear, and she was not looking at him, but the words were in the air between them, and they were not small words. Amina, he said. Don't make it into something tonight, she said. Just let it be what it is. He nodded, once. He looked back at the sky. They sat on the barn threshold with their shoulders touching while the ambulance came up the track and the cold settled deeper into the ground around them, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence between them was the first silence in months that didn't have the texture of everything unsaid. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple, or the way resolution looks when you observe it from outside a life rather than inside one. Tay spent 11 days in a hospital in Poughkeepsie and came out with a scar below his left shoulder blade that he described, once, as a conversation piece and never mentioned again. 3 of Seong Hwan's men faced federal charges. Seong Hwan himself faced more, and the process of assembling those charges pulled threads from a fabric that kept unraveling in directions that required a great deal of careful legal management and cooperation from a man named Kang Jun Seok, who gave his attorneys more to work with than they had expected, and less than they had hoped for, and who spent 43 days in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a midtown law firm that was not the same firm but was, he noted privately, exactly the same floor as the one where he had signed the divorce papers. Dr. Park's daughter's school received an anonymous security upgrade that nobody was officially able to explain. Dr. Park himself retired from the Fulton Street practice in December and moved his family to a town in New Jersey that had never appeared in any document connected to any person either of them knew. Jin was charged with 3 counts and took a deal that involved information and a sentence that her attorney described as manageable and that Jun Seok, when he heard it through his own attorney, received with an expression that contained grief and anger and something that was not forgiveness and was not its opposite either, but existed in the complicated space that 8 years of genuine service and 14 months of betrayal will create in a person with enough self-awareness to understand that people are not made of only one thing. Amina moved back to Brooklyn, a different apartment, larger, ground floor of a brownstone on a tree-lined block, with a room that got afternoon light and that she began slowly to prepare for a person who didn't yet exist outside of her body, but who was making their presence felt with increasing specificity. She worked. She took her prenatal appointments at a new practice in Park Slope, accompanied now by a security presence that she had stopped pretending to resent because she had sat on a barn threshold in November and understood what the alternative looked like. Jun Seok did not ask to come. She did not invite him. He asked twice through a message that was 3 lines long and careful and without the managed quality that had defined so much of his communication through 3 years of marriage. And she read both messages and did not respond immediately, which was itself a response of a kind, the kind that said she was thinking about it rather than no. He came to Brooklyn on a Thursday in February, the kind of February afternoon that has given up on winter without quite becoming anything else. Gray and mild and inconclusive. He did not call ahead. She opened the door and he was standing there with a paper bag from the Korean grocery on Court Street that contained the specific brand of ginger tea she had mentioned, once, in passing, in the kitchen of the safe house, because she had said ginger helped with the nausea and he had not written it down anywhere except the part of his memory that catalogued her without being asked. She looked at the bag, then at him. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything," he said. "I always did. I just didn't know how to tell you." She opened the door wider. He came in. The apartment was warm and smelled of paint. She had been redoing the small room in a pale yellow that had taken her 3 samples to land on, a decision-making process she had found, to her own surprise, satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with being the one who chose. He stood in the hallway and took in the space, and she watched him take it in and saw in his face the same thing she had begun to see in the barn doorway. The man underneath the architecture he had spent a lifetime building, looking at a life that was smaller than anything he had ever occupied, and finding it, for reasons he was only beginning to understand, more real than anything else he had. She put the kettle on. He sat at the kitchen table without being invited, which she noticed and chose not to address because it was the right thing to do, and making a point of it would have been smaller than the moment. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Enormous," she said. "And fine, both at once." "The appointment Thursday." "Was good. She's healthy, heartbeat is strong." She turned from the kettle and looked at him. He was very still. "A girl." "Yes." Something moved through his face that she had never seen before. Not the fracture she had seen in the safe house when the composure cracked. Something further in than that. The face of a person receiving information that reorganizes the way they understand the whole arrangement of their life. He looked at the table, then at his hands, then at her. "Can I—" He stopped, started again. "I would like to be at the next appointment, if you'll allow it." She looked at him for a moment. At the man who had loved her wrong for 3 years and had paid for it in ways that were not finished paying, who had sat down on a barn threshold in November and closed his eyes in the particular way of a person who has finally run out of the energy required to hold themselves upright by will alone, who had walked into a federal conference room and begun taking apart the machine he had spent 15 years building because the alternative was a world in which the woman he had pushed away was unprotected, and the child he had not yet met was at risk, and some things could not be calculated into an acceptable loss. "Yes," she said. "You can come." He nodded. He didn't say thank you, which was the right instinct. Thank you would have made it smaller. He simply nodded and looked at the table and breathed. The tea was ready. She brought it to the table and sat down across from him and pushed his mug across the worn wood, and he wrapped his hands around it the way she had wrapped her hands around the coffee mug at May's diner in what felt like a different life. And they sat in the kitchen of her apartment in Brooklyn, with the afternoon light falling through the window and the pale yellow room down the hall, waiting for someone they were both, in their different ways, already learning to love. She did not tell him she forgave him. Not that afternoon. Some things needed more time than an afternoon, and she was not a woman who spoke ahead of what she actually felt. But she let him stay for 2 hours, and she told him about the yellow paint and the difficulty of choosing it, and he listened without trying to fix anything, which was new and which she noticed. And when he left, he paused at the door and looked back at her with a face that no longer had the managed quality she had spent 3 years trying to read through, and she thought that maybe the most accurate thing she could say was that she was watching, and that watching was the beginning of something. Spring came with the slow deliberateness of a season that has learned not to promise more than it can deliver. The brownstone block on Atlantic Avenue got its leaves back. Amina's consulting practice picked up 3 new clients, one of whom was a small nonprofit that couldn't pay much, but whose work she believed in, and she took them on at a reduced rate because she was building something that needed to be built on what she actually valued, rather than on what the previous version of her life had taught her to reach for. Junseok came to 2 more appointments, then 3, standing in waiting rooms with the contained patience of a man who had decided that whatever role was available to him in this particular process was worth showing up for without demanding that it be larger. He did not push. This was the new thing. The old Junseok had been a man who decided at a remove and then arranged the world around his decision. The man who showed up on Thursdays in Brooklyn asked questions and waited for answers, and once, in the hallway of the Park Slope practice, sat with her through a 20-minute wait that turned into 35, without looking at his phone, without checking the door, without doing anything except being present in the way that a person is present when they have finally understood that presence is not a passive state, but a choice made every minute against the competing pull of everything else. She noticed. She didn't say so. She filed it with the tea, with the listening, with the face in the barn doorway. She was keeping a record of a different kind than the one she had kept through 3 years of marriage. Not a record of absences, but of what was accumulating in their place. Their daughter was born on the 14th of April at 6:41 in the morning at a hospital in Park Slope that smelled of antiseptic and institutional coffee and the particular charged air of a place where people are arriving into the world and leaving it in equal measure, and the staff have learned to hold both things at once. Junseok was there for all of it. He stood where he was told to stand and moved when she told him to move. And when she told him, at a critical point in the proceedings, to stop talking and just hold her hand, he stopped talking and held her hand with both of his and did not let go. He was not graceful about any of it. He was present for all of it, which was the only thing that mattered. When the nurse placed the baby in his arms for the first time, he looked down at her with an expression that had no analog in anything Amina had ever seen on his face before, because nothing in his life had prepared a face like his to receive something like this, small and complete, and entirely dependent on the willingness of 2 imperfect people to become something better than they had previously managed to be. He held the baby with the careful terror of a man who understands that he is holding something that cannot be protected by any of the mechanisms he knows, and must be protected anyway. Amina watched him from the bed. She was exhausted in a way that went deeper than the body, and she was more awake than she had been in months. And both things were true at once, and she was becoming comfortable with both things being true at once, because that seemed to be the actual texture of a life, rather than the simplified version she had tried to live for most of her 30s. "She looks like you," Junseok said. His voice was not steady. He didn't try to make it steady. "She has your stubbornness," Amina said. "Took her time." He looked up from the baby and looked at Amina, and his face was the face of the man underneath the man underneath the man. All the construction stripped away, standing in a hospital room at 6:41 in the morning with a daughter in his arms and his eyes wet in a way he did not hide or manage or decide about in advance. "Amina," he said. "I know," she said. She did. 3 months later, on a Saturday evening in July, when the light lasted long and fell golden through the trees behind the safe house in Millbrook, a property that had been quietly, thoroughly restructured, its security rebuilt from the ground up with personnel vetted by a process that left nothing to prior assumption. Jun Seok was in the garden with his daughter in his arms. She was 12 weeks old and had opinions about everything and expressed them with the full commitment of someone who has not yet learned that the world prefers you to modulate. She did not modulate. He walked her along the garden path with the patient repetitive motion she had identified as a preference, and she looked at the trees and the evening light with the focused attention of a person encountering a world she is still cataloging. Amina was sitting on the wooden bench at the garden's edge. She had a cup of tea and nothing else, which was the point. Just the evening and the garden and the sound of her daughter making the small declarative sounds of a person settling into satisfaction. She watched Jun Seok walk the garden path for a while, the way he held the baby, the way he adjusted his pace without thinking about it, responsive to the small shifts in her weight, the way he talked to her in a quiet mix of English and Korean that he had not planned and had not decided on, but that seemed to arrive naturally from whatever part of him existed before the architecture. He came to the bench and sat down beside her without asking, and the baby settled against his chest, and the garden held the last of the evening light in the way July gardens hold it, suspended, generous, unwilling to end. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked at him. "Not for a marriage," he said. "Not for anything that has a name already, just—" He stopped. The old Jun Seok would have found the word that positioned him most effectively. This one was quiet for a moment and arrived at the true thing instead. "A beginning, that's what I want to ask for, if you think it's possible." She looked at her daughter asleep against his chest, one small fist curled against the fabric of his shirt. She looked at the garden and the evening light and the trees that had been there longer than any of them and would be there after. She looked at the man beside her, who was not the man she had married, and was not the man she had divorced, and was not a new man exactly, but was the same man having, at considerable cost, become more of himself. "I think it's possible," she said. "I don't think it will be easy." "No," he said. "I don't think it will look like what either of us thought it would look like." "No." He looked at the baby. "I think it will look like this. Whatever this is." She put her hand on the bench between them, not reaching for him, just placing it there, and after a moment his hand moved to cover hers. Not claiming, not grasping, just resting, the way you rest your hand on something you know is not entirely yours, but that you are grateful to be near. The light held a little longer. The garden was very quiet. The daughter slept on, indifferent to the enormity of the moment, dreaming the formless dreams of someone brand new to the business of being alive, while the two people responsible for her sat on a wooden bench in the evening and breathed the same air and decided, without a ceremony or a signature or a word spoken aloud to mark it, that this was where they were beginning.